The room was silent, except for the low hum of alien machinery. Captain Daniel stood in the middle, hands behind his back. Watching the tall alien figure approach, the alien commander's 4 eyes studied him with the kind of suspicion only years of war could create. "You will be assigned a personal guard," the commander said, his voice deep and cold. "She is one of our finest soldiers, but do not expect friendship." The door slid open, and Lyra walked in. Her armor gleamed silver under the dim lights, and a long scar ran from her left temple to her jaw. She looked like someone who had seen more battles than peace, her dark purple eyes fixed on Daniel without a single blink. "This is Lyra," the commander continued. "She will serve you as part of the peace agreement between our species. Do not mistake this for kindness. Human it is duty." Daniel gave a small nod. Understood. But as Lyra stepped closer, he noticed the way her shoulders stiffened. She wasn't happy to be here. Not at all. They walked side by side through the metallic corridors of the alien station. Lyra didn't speak a word. Daniel tried to break the ice. "I guess we're partners now," he said lightly. Her reply was sharp and quick. "We are not partners. Human, I am assigned to protect. You, nothing more?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Fair enough," he said. But his mind was already curious about her. Hours later, they arrived at the docking bay. The peace mission required them to travel to a neutral moon where both human and alien diplomats would meet. Daniel carried only a small case with his essentials. Lyra checked her plasma rifle with precise movements, her every motion screaming discipline as they boarded the small transport ship. Daniel noticed something. Her armor had dense fresh ones, like she had been in a fight only days ago. But she wore them without shame, like badges of survival. The journey was quiet. Daniel sat by the window, staring at the endless stars. Lyra stood guard near the hatch, every muscle tense. It felt less like traveling with a protector, and more like traveling with a prison warden. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "So, have you protected many humans before?" She turned her head slowly. "No, and I do not intend to start now." Daniel chuckled. "Then, what am I?" "A diplomatic task, nothing more," she replied. Her voice flat. The ship suddenly jolted. Alarms blared. Red lights flashing across the cabin. Daniel grabbed the side rail. What was that? Lyra's eyes narrowed. Not good. Someone's firing on us. She rushed to the controls, checking the radar. 2 unknown vessels were closing in fast. Weapons hot. "Pirates," she hissed. Daniel felt the air grow heavy with danger. The first blast hit the ship, throwing him off balance. Lyra caught him before he could fall. Her touch was firm, but brief. "Stay behind me," she ordered. Pulling her rifle from its holster, the pirates breached the ship in less than a minute. Daniel found himself staring at 3 figures in rusted armor, their faces hidden behind breathing masks. One of them shouted in a language he didn't understand. But Lyra clearly did. Her eyes darkened. Without hesitation, she fired. The sound of her plasma rifle filling the cabin with blue light. 2 pirates fell instantly, but the third lunged forward. Daniel didn't think he moved. Grabbing a fallen pirate's weapon and swinging it hard into the attacker's chest. The pirate collapsed with a grunt. When the fight was over, Lyra turned to him. Her breathing was heavy, her armor scorched. "You are a fool," she said sharply. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "For helping you." "For risking your life when you didn't have to," she replied, her voice tight. "That is not what humans do." Daniel leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "Maybe not the humans you've met," he said, "but I'm not here to let someone else take all the risks." For the first time, Lyra's gaze lingered on him. It wasn't soft, but it wasn't cold either. She said nothing, turning back to check the ship's controls. But Daniel could tell something had shifted between them. The ship resumed its course. Daniel noticed her glancing at him more than before. Not with trust, not yet, but with a faint trace of curiosity. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this mission wasn't just about peace between their species. It was about something deeper, something neither of them understood yet. The kind of connection that could change both of their worlds. The transport ship landed on the neutral moon with a soft hiss of steam. Outside, the pale ground stretched under a gray sky, dotted with tall glass towers belonging to the Peace Council. Daniel stepped down first, feeling the chill in the air. Lyra followed, scanning every shadow like danger could strike at any second. 2 alien guards approached them, their armor bearing the symbol of the Peace Council. They escorted Daniel and Lyra to a temporary residence, a large metal structure with separate rooms. It looked safe, but Daniel knew looks could be deceiving. Lyra wasted no time the moment they arrived. She inspected every corner of his room, scanning for hidden devices. Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You always this thorough?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I have been assigned to keep you alive. Human, I will not fail." He smiled slightly. "You could just call me Daniel, you know?" Lyra's eyes flicked toward him. But she didn't answer. Instead, she moved to her own room across the hall, leaving him alone for the next 2 days. Their partnership felt like 2 strangers forced to share the same space. Lyra kept to herself, eating at a different table, walking a few steps ahead during their patrols. Daniel didn't push. He knew trust wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. Still, he found small ways to bridge the gap. One evening, while she was cleaning her rifle, he approached with a small metal box. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Your armor," he said. "It's got a dent from the pirate attack." "Figured I'd fix it for you." Lyra's brows furrowed. "That is unnecessary." "Maybe," Daniel replied, taking out a small tool and smoothing the metal, "but where I'm from, we look out for the people who save our lives." She didn't respond, but she didn't stop him either. Later that night, a sudden commotion echoed through the compound. Daniel grabbed his sidearm and stepped into the hall. Lyra was already there, her rifle raised. They moved together toward the noise, boots silent on the metal floor. They found the source in the council's storage wing, a group of intruders trying to break into a secured crate. Lyra fired a warning shot, and the thieves scattered into the shadows. Daniel chased one down a side corridor, catching the alien by the arm. The thief pulled a blade, but before he could strike, Lyra appeared, slamming him against the wall. "Do not wander off alone again," she said, her voice sharp. Daniel caught his breath and let you have all the fun. Not likely for a moment. Her expression almost softened, but then it was gone, replaced by the same hard mask. That night, while they stood watch on the balcony, Daniel decided to try again. "You ever wonder what it would be like if there wasn't a treaty?" he asked. Lyra's gaze stayed on the horizon. "Then you and I would be enemies." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe we'd still end up here, watching the same stars." She finally turned to look at him. "Humans," she said quietly. "You speak as if everything can be solved with words and hope. And you speak as if nothing can," he replied, for the first time since they met. She didn't have an answer. The next morning, Lyra received a secure communication. Daniel. Noticed the way her hands tightened on the device as she read it. When she stepped out of her room, her eyes were colder than ever. "Everything all right?" he asked. "It is nothing that concerns you," she said flatly, walking past him. But Daniel knew that look. It was the look of someone carrying a secret heavy enough to change everything. Their mission continued: meetings with alien and human diplomats, long patrols around the compound. But Daniel could feel the invisible wall between them growing thinner. One night, while they were guarding the outer perimeter, they stopped by a small campfire the local workers had made. Daniel handed her a cup of warm broth. She hesitated, then took it, sipping slowly. "You always this stubborn?" Daniel asked with a faint smile. Lyra looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Stubborn keeps you alive," she said. "Maybe," Daniel replied. "But sometimes it keeps you from living." Something flickered in her eyes. She didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. 2 days later, the tension broke. During a patrol in the industrial sector, an explosion ripped through one of the council warehouses. Smoke filled the air. Alarms blared. Lyra shoved Daniel behind cover, firing at unknown attackers that emerged from the haze. One of them aimed for Daniel. Lyra moved without thinking, stepping into the line of fire. Taking the hit on her armor plate, Daniel pulled her back to safety, returning fire until the attackers fled. When the smoke cleared, he turned to her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, touching the scorched plate on her chest. "You could have been killed," Daniel said, his voice tight. "I told you," Lyra replied. "Keeping you alive is my duty." But her voice had changed softer, almost reluctant to admit that it wasn't just duty anymore. As they walked back to the compound under the fading light, Daniel caught her watching him, not with suspicion, not with contempt, but with something else, something she didn't yet understand, and Daniel, quietly, began to wonder if this was still only about peace between their species, or the beginning of something far more dangerous. The days on the neutral moon were starting to blur together. Meetings, patrols, briefings, an endless cycle of duty. But Daniel noticed something had changed between them. Lyra still stood tall, still kept her guard up. But her words had lost some of their sharp edges, and sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she watched him. One evening, the council arranged a reception to celebrate the ongoing peace talks. The hall was filled with diplomats, alien officers, and human delegates. Light from floating crystal orbs reflected off polished floors. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, a glass in hand. Lyra was nearby, scanning the room like a predator. In unfamiliar territory, he noticed she avoided the food tables. "You don't eat at these things?" he asked. Her lips twitched, maybe the start of a smile. "Maybe not. I eat when I am hungry, not when politics demands it," she replied. They ended up standing near one of the wide windows that showed the moon's pale surface. "It's strange," Daniel said quietly, "being here with you. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought this possible." Lyra tilted her head. "And now?" "Now," he said, meeting her eyes. "I'm glad it happened." For a brief second, something flickered in her expression. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it wasn't cold either. That night, back in the compound, Daniel was in his room when he heard the faint hum of Lyra's communicator through the thin wall. The tone in her voice was different, low, tense, careful. He couldn't make out the words, but the way she paused told him she was listening to orders. Later, she walked past his door, and he caught a glimpse of her face, her jaw tight, her steps heavier than usual. "Everything okay?" he asked from the doorway. She stopped, but didn't turn fully toward him. "Yes," she said after a pause, "just another mission update." Then she walked away, leaving him with a quiet sense that she was hiding something. The next day, they were assigned to escort a group of council representatives to the industrial zone as they moved through the busy streets. Daniel noticed Lyra's focus was split. Her eyes flicked not just to potential threats, but also to him, like she was weighing something at one point. They stopped near a vendor selling trinkets from across the galaxy. Daniel picked up a small, carved pendant shaped like a bird. "It's from Earth," the vendor explained. "Copied from your ancient cultures." Daniel smiled. "Reminds me of home." He turned to show Lyra, but she was already looking at it. "It is delicate," she said quietly, almost surprised at herself. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stepped out onto the balcony and found Lyra already there, her eyes fixed on the alien constellations above. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "I was thinking About what? About choices, she said, her voice softer than usual. In my world, duty is everything. Daniel, you obey. You do not question, you do not feel. Daniel leaned against the railing, and now, Lyra's eyes met his for a long moment. Now, I am questioning, she admitted, the next morning, while on patrol. A courier drone arrived for Lyra. She read the encrypted message. And her face went still like stone. When Daniel asked, she simply said, "Nothing urgent," and moved on. But she was quieter that day, and he could sense the weight pressing on her. That evening, she disappeared for an hour without telling him where she went. When she returned, her gloves were dusty, and there was a faint trace of tension in her hands. Daniel didn't press her for answers, yet, 3 days later, the truth began to leak through. During a meeting with the council, Officer Daniel accidentally overheard a whisper between two alien guards. "The human is marked. Orders from High Command." Daniel's gut tightened. When he glanced at Lyra, she was staring straight ahead. But her hands were clenched at her sides. That night, he found her outside again. "You've been distant," he said, "and not just your usual distant. Something's wrong." Lyra hesitated. "Daniel, if I told you something, it could put us both in danger, I'd still want to hear it." He replied. She looked away, her jaw working like she was wrestling with herself. Finally, she said, "I was ordered that if you become too close, too trusted, I must end the assignment permanently." Daniel's chest tightened. "End the assignment." "Meaning kill me," he said quietly. Lyra didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. For a long moment, they just stood there in the pale moonlight. Finally, Daniel said, "And are you going to follow that order?" Lyra's voice was steady but low. "I do not know," but in her eyes, for the first time, he saw the battle between what she had been trained to be, what she was starting to feel. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the woman guarding his door was there to protect him more, decide when his time would end. And Lyra, sitting silently in the hallway, wondered why the thought of following her orders suddenly felt like a betrayal she couldn't stomach. The neutral moon looked peaceful under the pale light, but Daniel knew peace here was a thin layer over sharp edges. Lyra had told him about the order. Kill him if he became too close. Since then, every time he saw her standing at his side, he wondered if she was thinking about pulling the trigger, and yet, something in her eyes told him she wasn't ready to follow that order. The peace talks were reaching a critical stage. The council chamber was filled with representatives from both species. Voices raised over trade rights, border lines, and shared resources. Daniel sat among the human delegation, listening carefully. Lyra stood behind him, silent as stone, her presence both comforting and dangerous. Halfway through the meeting, Daniel slipped a folded paper into his pocket. It was a sketch he had been working on for a drawing of humans and aliens building something together. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind, waiting for Lyra to finish her sweep of the chamber. "Here," he said, holding out the paper. She frowned, taking it with hesitation. Her eyes studied the drawing, tracing the outlines of alien and human hands clasped in a handshake. "It is hopeful," she said quietly. "It's what I want," Daniel replied. "A future where people like you and me aren't just duty-bound allies, but something real." She looked at him for a long time, her scar catching the light. But before she could speak, her communicator buzzed. She turned away to answer. Daniel watched the way her shoulders tensed. He already knew it was another order. Later that night, Lyra didn't join him for patrol. Daniel found her in the training hall, striking a practice dummy over and over. Her movements were sharp, almost angry. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't stop hitting the dummy. "They've set the time," she said finally. Daniel stepped closer. "The time? For what?" "For your removal." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. but she kept her back to him. "You can refuse," Daniel said. "It's not that simple," Lyra replied. "If I disobey, I will be hunted, branded a traitor, and—" She hesitated. "They will send someone else, someone who will not hesitate." Daniel walked around to face her. "Then let's find another way," he said. Her hands clenched into fists. "There is no other way in my world. Daniel, you obey or you die." The next morning, Daniel noticed extra security around the compound. Lyra stayed close, but her silence felt heavier than before. When they reached the conference hall, she scanned every corner, every shadow. Daniel knew she was looking for the assassin, though, by her own orders. That assassin was supposed to be her. By midday, the council gathered again. Daniel sat near the edge of the table, feeling the weight of Lyra's presence at his back. His mind was running through escape routes. Then he noticed something: two alien soldiers at the far end of the hall, whispering into their comms, their eyes darting toward him. Lyra noticed too. In an instant, her body shifted, hand hovering near her rifle. Her eyes locked on the soldiers. And Daniel realized she had made her choice. The first shot came fast. One of the alien soldiers drew a weapon, aiming straight at Daniel. Before he could fire, Lyra moved, knocking Daniel to the ground and taking the blast on her armor. Pain flared across her shoulder, but she didn't slow down. She fired back, dropping the attacker before turning her weapon on the second soldier. The council room erupted in chaos, diplomats scattering, guards shouting. Daniel pulled her behind cover. "You just broke your orders," he said over the noise. Lyra's breathing was hard. "Then I guess I'm done following orders." Within minutes, the attackers were dead or captured, but the damage was done. Lyra had openly defied her commanders. As they left the hall, Daniel saw the way other alien soldiers looked at her now, like she was already a traitor. Back in their quarters, Daniel wrapped a bandage around her wounded shoulder. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "Yes, I did," she said. "Because you were never just my duty." "Not anymore." Daniel didn't speak for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "You know this means they'll come after both of us now." "I know," she replied, "and I will protect you until my last breath." That night, they didn't sleep. Lyra sat by the door with her rifle, watching the shadows. Daniel lay awake, staring at the faint glow of the moon through the window, somewhere deep inside. He knew the next move wouldn't be defense, it would have to be escape. And for the first time, Lyra seemed ready to fight for something not written in her orders, something she had chosen for herself. The alarm sirens wailed across the compound. Daniel knew they weren't warning about an external attack. This was about them. Lyra stood by the window, her eyes scanning the streets below. "They've already sealed the main exits," she said. "We don't have much time." Daniel was sitting at the small table, checking the ammunition of a stolen alien sidearm. "Where do we go?" he asked. Lyra turned toward him, her expression set. "There's a service tunnel under the east wall. It leads to the freight docks. From there, we can get a ship." Daniel stood, grabbing his pack. "Then let's move before they send your replacement." Lyra's jaw tightened. "They already have." They slipped into the dim corridors. Every step echoed against the cold metal floors. Lyra kept her rifle ready, her senses sharp. She had been in hundreds of missions, but never one where she was the target. At one corner, a squad of alien soldiers blocked their path. Lyra didn't hesitate. She threw a flash charge, the burst of light blinding their pursuers long enough for her and Daniel to sprint past. Daniel's lungs burned, but he didn't slow down. "Is this how you treat all your VIPs?" he called over his shoulder. Lyra almost smirked. "Only the stubborn ones." They reached the maintenance hatch for the service tunnel. It was locked with an encrypted panel. Lyra knelt, pulling out a small device from her belt. "Can you open it?" Daniel asked. "I can open anything," she said, fingers working quickly. A spark A beep and the hatch slid open. Inside, the tunnel was narrow and dark. The air smelled of rust and oil. Daniel followed close behind her, their footsteps muffled. On the grated floor, every now and then, Lyra would stop, listening for movement. "Someone's following us," she whispered after one pause. Moments later, a shadow moved in the darkness ahead. An alien figure stepped into view, armor black, weapon drawn, visor reflecting the faint lights of the tunnel. Daniel saw Lyra's posture shift. "That's not just a soldier," she murmured. "That's a hunter." The hunter moved fast, firing in short bursts. Lyra shoved Daniel against the wall, returning fire. The tunnel echoed with the sound of plasma bolts. Daniel grabbed a loose pipe from the wall, waiting until the hunter got close. When he did, Daniel swung hard, knocking the alien off balance. Lyra finished him with a precise shot to the chest. They didn't speak after that. There was no time. The tunnel ended at a small loading platform above the freight docks. Below, dozens of cargo crates were stacked beside a transport ship. "Think we can take that one?" Daniel asked, pointing. Lyra studied the guards patrolling the area. "Yes," she said, "but we'll have to drop down fast and silent." They moved along the catwalk, using the shadows for cover. At one point, a guard nearly spotted them. But Lyra pulled Daniel close, pressing him against the wall. For a heartbeat, they were inches apart. Her eyes locked on his, intense. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Always." He replied without thinking. They reached the far side and jumped down behind a stack of crates. The guards were distracted by an incoming supply shipment. Lyra motioned for Daniel to move. They dashed toward the transport ship, climbing aboard through a maintenance hatch inside. The ship smelled of fuel and metal. Daniel hurried to the cockpit, scanning the unfamiliar controls. "Can you fly this?" Lyra asked. "Not well," he admitted, "but well enough to get us off this rock." She slid into the co-pilot seat, strapping in. As Daniel fired up the engines, shouts echoed outside. The guards had noticed. Plasma fire lit up the docking bay, bolts slamming into the ship's hull. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, pulling the controls hard. The ship lifted, shaking under enemy fire. Lyra fired the rear cannons, taking out to pursuing speeders. The neutral moon's gray surface began to fall away beneath them, but their escape wasn't clean too. Alien interceptors were closing in. Daniel pushed the engines to their limit. The ship roared through the thin atmosphere, stars opening up before them. Lyra fired again, hitting one interceptor. But the other stayed on their tail. It wasn't until Daniel veered sharply around a small asteroid field that they lost him. Finally, silence filled the cockpit. Lyra leaned back, her breathing heavy. "You've just made yourself the most wanted human in this sector," she said. Daniel glanced at her. "Guess we're in this together now." Her eyes softened, just slightly. "Yes," she said. "We are," as the ship drifted toward deep space. Daniel realized something. They weren't just running from her people anymore. They were running toward something else. Something neither of them fully understood yet. But neither wanted to turn away from Asterisk. The stolen transport drifted quietly through deep space. Daniel was in the back, repairing a damaged power conduit. Lyra sat in the cockpit, scanning nearby systems for a place to hide. Her eyes were shadowed. She knew they couldn't keep running forever. Suddenly, the proximity alarm screamed. Lyra's gaze snapped to the radar. 3 alien warships closing fast. "They've found us," she muttered. Before Daniel could reach the cockpit, the first ship fired, rocking the transport violently. Daniel grabbed the side rail to keep from falling. "We can't outrun them," he shouted. Lyra's hands danced over the controls. "I'm not trying to outrun them," she said. "I'm trying to lose them." The ship dove toward a dense asteroid belt, weaving between massive rocks. For a moment, it worked too. The warships pulled back, but the third stayed close, matching every move. A sudden jolt threw Daniel to the deck. The enemy's boarding harpoons pierced the hull with a loud clang. "They're coming in." He yelled, grabbing his weapon. The airlock exploded inward, and a squad of heavily armed alien soldiers stormed in. Lyra fought fiercely, her plasma rifle spitting blue light. Daniel took cover behind a crate, firing when he could, but they were outnumbered. A stun blast caught Daniel in the side, his vision blurred. His legs gave way. He collapsed to the floor, hearing Lyra shout his name. Two soldiers grabbed him. Dragging him toward the airlock, Lyra lunged forward, cutting down one. But the others pulled back fast, sealing the hatch. The last thing Daniel saw before blacking out was Lyra pounding her fist against the locked door when the transport fell. Silent Lyra stood alone in the ruined corridor. Her rifle hung loosely at her side, her breaths sharp and uneven. She had lost him, not to an assassin, not to her orders, but to the very people she had once served. She didn't hesitate. She ran to the cockpit, scanning the departing warship, her jaw set, eyes burning with fury. "They're taking him to Varric Station," she muttered to herself. She knew that place an isolated military prison, almost impossible to escape from. Almost hours later, Lyra's stolen transport approached Varric Station's dark silhouette. Against a dead star, the station's defenses were tight patrol ships, minefields, automated turrets. A normal pilot wouldn't dare get close. But Lyra wasn't normal. She powered down the transport, letting it drift like space debris, slowly, silently. It floated toward one of the station's maintenance ports when she was close enough. She suited up in black infiltration armor, no insignia, no markings, just a shadow in space. Inside the station, she moved like a ghost through dim corridors, her rifle slung across her back, a knife in her hand. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. She had only one target: Daniel. She hacked into a security panel, pulling up prisoner logs. Her eyes narrowed. Cell block 7. Level D, maximum security. Exactly where they kept political threats and high-value captives. The first guard she encountered didn't even have time to shout before she dropped him with a silent strike. She dragged his body into a storage room, taking his access card. Step by step, she descended deeper into the prison's core. Finally, she reached the heavy blast doors of Level D. Two guards stood outside, chatting in low voices. Lyra tossed a small smoke grenade into their midst. The instant they coughed and stumbled, she was on them quick. Brutal, efficient, inside the block. The air was cold and heavy. Daniel sat in a reinforced cell, wrists bound, his face pale from whatever drug they had used to keep him weak. When he looked up and saw her through the bars, he almost didn't believe it. "Lyra?" he rasped. She stepped forward, gripping the bars. "I'm getting you out." "Not a good idea," he said with a weak smile. "There are at least 20 guards on this floor." "I'll take them all if I have to," she replied, and she meant it. The lock clicked open under her stolen access card. Daniel stumbled out, and she caught him, her arm around his waist. "You're hurt," she said. "Just tired." He replied, "Let's go before they notice." But they had already noticed. An alarm blared, and heavy boots thundered down the corridor. Lyra turned, pushing Daniel toward the nearest cover. "Stay behind me," she shouted, firing in controlled bursts. They fought their way through the twisting halls. At one junction, 3 guards tried to block their escape. Rara dropped 2, while Daniel, still unsteady, managed to disarm the 3rd. By the time they reached the hangar bay, Lyra's rifle was nearly out of power. A sleek patrol ship sat idle on the deck. Lyra half-dragged, half-guided Daniel toward it. Shots rang out behind them, but they dived into the cockpit. Lyra hit the launch sequence. Without strapping in, the engines roared, and the ship blasted out into open space. As Varric Station shrank behind them, Daniel looked at her. "You risked everything for me," he said quietly. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I told you before. You were never just my duty, for the first time since they'd met. Daniel saw her smile, faint but real, and for the first time. Lyra felt the weight of her old orders finally fall away. The patrol ship glided through the silent dark. Daniel sat in the co-pilot seat, his head resting against the frame. Eyes half closed from exhaustion, Lyra kept her hands steady on the controls. Watching the navigation screen, they had left Verac Station far behind. But she knew pursuit was still possible. A small neutral colony appeared on the radar, isolated, independent. No formal ties to either human or alien governments. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions. That's where we'll land, Lyra said quietly. Daniel gave a faint nod. Lead the way. The colony was simple low metal buildings. Winding streets lit by dim lanterns, the air smelled of dust and warm bread from a nearby vendor. Children darted between houses, laughing, their voices carrying through the night. Daniel looked around and felt a strange peace. For the first time in weeks, there were no sirens, no orders, no guns aimed at them. Lyra rented a small room above a tavern. It had 2 narrow beds, a table, and a single window looking out over the street. Daniel dropped onto one of the beds with a groan. Lyra stood by the window, scanning the alley below. You can relax, Daniel said. We made it. She didn't answer, but after a moment, she stepped away from the window and sat on the edge of the other bed. Days passed quietly. Daniel helped repair machinery for local traders in exchange for food and supplies. Lyra, unused to idleness, began training in the dusty courtyard behind the tavern. Some of the village children would gather to watch her drills, their eyes wide. Daniel noticed that she no longer wore her old uniform. It sat folded in a corner of the room, untouched. One evening, they sat outside on the wooden steps, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. You ever think about what comes next? Daniel asked. Lyra's eyes stayed on the horizon. I was trained not to, she admitted. And now? She hesitated, then said, now, eh? I think about it more than I should. The conversation ended when an old trader passed by, offering them a loaf of bread as thanks for fixing his generator. Daniel took it with a smile, breaking it in half and handing the other piece to Lyra. She accepted it without her usual hesitation. It was a small gesture, but Daniel felt something shifting her. Walls were no longer made of steel, but something softer. One night, a storm swept through the colony. Rain lashed the streets. The wind rattled the shutters. Daniel sat at the table, sketching another picture. Lyra returned from the balcony, damp from the rain. What are you drawing? She asked. He turned the sketch toward her. It showed the two of them standing under a starry sky. Not as soldier in guard, but simply as people. Her eyes lingered on the page. This isn't duty, she said quietly, almost to herself. No, Daniel replied. It's choice. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the storm outside echoing the storm inside her. Finally, Lyra said, when I first met you, I thought you were weak, naive. Naive now. I see you're stubborn in ways I've never known, and it makes me not want to leave. The next day, Daniel woke early and found Lyra sitting outside, her rifle across her lap. You're up early, he said. I couldn't sleep, she replied. I've been thinking. I can't go back, Daniel. Even if the war ends, I can never serve them again. I would rather live in hiding than live without my own choice. Daniel sat beside her. Then don't live without it, he said. She turned to him. What does that mean? It means, Daniel said with a small smile, stay here with me. Her eyes searched his, looking for doubt. She didn't find any. That evening, they stood on the rooftop, watching the stars appear one by one. Lyra's hand rested at her side, close enough for Daniel's fingers to brush against hers. Neither of them moved away. You know, she said softly, This is the first time I've ever felt free. Daniel glanced at her. Free from what? From duty, she said, and free to want something else. He smiled. And what is it you want? Her gaze stayed on the stars, but her fingers curled into his. You, she whispered. From that moment on, there were no more walls between them. They were no longer human and alien. Soldier and captain, they were simply Daniel and Lyrat to people who had chosen each other. Not because a treaty demanded it, not because orders required it, but because in the end, desire was stronger than duty in the quiet colony, under a sky full of unfamiliar constellations. They began building a life that belonged to them alone, and if anyone came looking, Lyra was ready, not as a soldier following orders, but as a woman protecting the person she had chosen to love.